just drop an emoji if you can hear me. All right, got some yeses, some yups. I'd also love if everyone could just drop an emoji to let me know what you're feeling today. I love to see all the energy in the chat box. And Joni and I are absolutely excited to be here. So the matching energy will definitely help us to get even more hype for this conversation. I want to thank you all so much for joining the first Gen in Tech experience. I'm so excited. The HubSpot put something like this together and excited to be a part of it. My name is Iman Griffin and I am a HubSpotter, and I'm so excited to be part of this interview preparation session with Joni because Joni actually brought me on to HubSpot. So it's kind of a full circle moment to be a first gen in tech with a first gen in tech and having this conversation with other folks interested in just learning. So before we get started, I just want to let you all know that this conversation will be just that. It'll be a conversation. So we want to hear you. We want to know what you're thinking, hear some of your questions. We'll have a Q&A portion at the end of the show, but if you have like a burning question, like drop it in the chat and we'll try our best to work it in. But this is going to be super casual and Joni's going to drop some amazing gems. So I just want to take a moment and allow her to introduce herself really quick before we get started.
Thanks so much, Iman. I'm Joni Factor. You can see me here with my two littles. They're 8 and 4, respectively. I think this picture perfectly encapsulates working mom life. So, hope you're enjoying it. I'm based outside of Boston in Natick, and I'm a senior recruiter at HubSpot. I'm a first generation college graduate, and I was a career changer. I joined HubSpot about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Oh, there's one other thing I should share, Iman.
What's one other thing?
I totally advocated hard for you to be my MC. I don't know if you fully know the level to which I was like, it's got to be Iman. So I would love for you to introduce yourself because you're incredible, and I'm so excited to spend this hour with you.
Thank you. I'm super excited to spend this hour for you. Again, it just makes sense. My name is Iman Griffin. I go by the pronouns she and her, and I'm also a first gen in college and a first gen in tech. And I'm also a career changer. So I came from education and I transitioned in tech. So I feel all the folks who mentioned how they are interested in getting in tech. Like I feel you. I've been there before, and I think this session is going to be a great start. I am based in Philadelphia, born and raised in Philadelphia as well. And I'm a diversity, inclusion, and belonging program manager supporting our employee resource groups here at HubSpot. So this is going to be a great conversation. Super excited to get started. And shout out to Ginger, who's controlling our slides for us. We really appreciate that. So here's our agenda for today. So first, we want to get started with some behavioral interviews. If you're like, what's a behavioral interview? That's a great question. We'll get into all that. Then we want to talk about transferable experience. As we both mentioned, Joni and I both were career changers. So we want to be able to offer some advice. So no matter where you are, you know how you can relay your experience for different roles. We want to get into imposter syndrome because we all know that's real. So we want to address some ways that we get over our own imposter syndrome. And we want to discuss compensation because as first gens in tech, college, and especially as marginalized individuals, compensation can be like a tricky subject. And then we'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A portion. So let's get started.
Sounds good.
All right. So let's get started with some behavioral interviews. I think that this is just kind of like the 101.
Yeah, so behavioral interviews are definitely considered best practice, and lots of tech companies use this style of interview. So it is a really helpful thing to be familiar with if you are looking to make that switch. Behavioral interview is just something, interview questions that focus on past behaviors that are going to closely relate to what you'd be doing on the job. The good news for everyone in everyone for all our attendees is that behavioral interviews are essentially like set up to highlight transferable experience. So that is a win from just like right out the gate.
Okay, so is it safe to say that all interviews are behavioral interviews?
Not all. Sometimes folks can focus on situational, which is like, hey, Aman, what would you do if these three crazy things happened all at once? How would you approach that challenge? Behavioral questions are focused on the past, so how you've handled situations in the past.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So now that you let us know a little bit about what behavioral interviews are, I think on this slide we're going to talk a little bit more about preparing thoughtfully.
Yep, absolutely. Um, and Ginger, can you click one more time? Because I think there's a wonky automation thing happening. There we go. Thank you. So I think, when you sit down and you have that moment to speak with someone from a tech company, it's going to be really important to do a couple of things. So, the first is to really understand what the company cares about. For those of you that joined Leo's session earlier, there was a ton of comments in the chat connected to our culture code and our heart acronym. That language, those things are things that HubSpot really cares about. If you're thinking about other tech companies, I'll just give a couple of examples just so folks know that it like looks different everywhere. Amazon really cares about their leadership principles. Google really cares about their mission. And so, if you can mimic that language and utilize the language that the company is using when you talk
Goals.
about why you're excited to be interviewing at them, that will be really helpful. It will help the person at that company like see you in seat as if you're
Mhm.
already there. Um, Please know why you applied. It's like really painful when somebody says that, like, oh, I don't know, I'm applying everywhere. It's maybe you are, like, that's okay. If there's no shame in that. But once you get that interview, make sure you've done the research to understand why this would be a good fit for you.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Okay, and I think so. After you feel like you're prepared, then what next?
Well, let's go to the next slide. I really encourage people to bring their authentic self to an interview. Unique perspectives are valued, and I think that one of the benefits of the tech industry is that it recognizes that diverse teams and diversity in all of the senses, whether it's gender or your physical or neurological ability, like all of those different things, like across the diversity spectrum, can really strengthen teams and increase their outcomes. So bring your unique perspective. I think that's super helpful. Differentiating factors. I like being yourself in an interview is really helpful because that interviewer or hiring manager may have talked to anywhere between like 5 to 10 people that day. And they're having like pretty consistent conversations with each candidate in order to ensure equity. So if there is a thread in the conversation that um, that helps you stand out and helps you be memorable, that is so helpful to the recruiter because it allows them to be like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation. We talked about headbands for 5 minutes, but then they told me all about da 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 and like X, Y, and Z that they did, and it's just really helpful.
Okay.
Um, and then I'm on. Interviewing is a two-way street. This feels so important to me. I definitely want to talk about it a little bit more, but I'm curious, what you think that like I'm curious what folks' reaction to interviewing being a two-way street.
Yeah, so in the chat box, let us know like how comfortable do you feel asking questions during the interview? I know for me, I try to always think of some questions that I'm like genuinely like curious about before the interview even happens. Like if I go on the hiring manager or the recruiter's LinkedIn and I see that they're from the East Coast and I'm from the East Coast too, I'll ask them like, maybe what it was like to relocate for their role. I'll ask them what it was like to pivot from being a communications major to working in like maybe engineering, something that I'm genuinely curious about. But I like what you're about to share because it gets a little bit more into like the day to day, like the task associated with the role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to drop in the chat an example question. And I saw some other good questions come up. There is, I think, a question tab. So please go ahead and drop those in there because we drop any questions you have as we go through in the question tab because I know that we will have lots of time to cover that. And I really want to get to that portion. I know it's super meaty. So, okay, you are in an interview and I'm telling you, it's a two-way street. Like, they are not just interviewing you. You need to interview the company to understand if it's a good fit for you. So, the example question that I just dropped into the chat was if you're asked to, if the interviewer says to you, Aman, tell me about a time you had to navigate uncertainty or rapidly changing goals in the workplace, right? What do they expect in that moment? If interviewing is a two-way street. They expect you to answer the question, right? Like you need to answer the question. That is critical. But this isn't a situation where you show up and are kind of like to the company like, well, what can you do for me? Like, how can you make my life better? Like, what are you going to value add to me? The way to respond to those questions is to actually flip the question. So instead, so saying something like, well, actually, you'd be talking to me in this case, right? Like, actually, Joni, like, what are the conditions that are creating uncertainty and these evolving goals at the company? That question is going to give you a ton of insight as to what's going on behind the scenes. It's going to help you understand. Um, it's going to help you understand if that's a good fit for you or not. Some people really thrive on structure. Some people can handle goals changing rapidly. Other people are like, that is my worst nightmare. I do not want that to happen. Probably not a good fit. So that would be my example of how to like interview as a two-way street, flip the question.
I love that. It seems like a lot of folks in the chat box really love the idea of flipping the question, and it's just good to know that you even can do that. Sometimes we just feel like we can't. We have to kind of stick to the script when it comes to interviewing. But as you said, it might help you to learn if this role is right for you, which is like the ultimate goal of an interview, not just to get the job, but to make sure you get the job that's the best fit for you.
Yeah, and it really makes you come off as thoughtful,
Mhm.
and as like someone who's like really critically evaluating the job um, and company for what it is, which I think is something that's really appealing.
Okay, perfect. So it sounds like be yourself. Don't be afraid of your unique perspectives. Very intentionally and organically try to find a way to differentiate yourself. And don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if they are related to the job. So, what else? What else do we need to know about the actual interview process?
Well, before we go to the next slide, I'll just,
Mhm.
Mary asked a great question in the
Okay.
chat, so I'll just answer that. And then we can go ahead to the next slide. So, Mary, the key in that moment, so she asked, does the interviewer ever think that you're just avoiding the question? You actually want to answer the question first, and then follow up your response with the flipped question. Great. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. Ah, okay. So this is like perfect. It just like reiterates my point. So, um, I know this sounds a little bit silly, but the first hurdle in the interview is to actually answer the question. Um, Interviews can be nerve wracking. I don't know anyone who interviews that isn't a little bit nervous when they go into an interview. If you get nervous in interviews, can you please drop an emoji in the chat for me? Because I strongly believe that this is something that happens for everyone. I'll say that I like interview for a living, and yet when I have to interview, I get nervous. So pause, be thoughtful in your response. Aman, what do you do to make sure that you are answering the actual question that's been asked?
Yeah, so that pause is like key for me, making sure that I take a moment to think about the question. But one thing I've learned about myself is that I'm a visual learner. So sometimes when someone's speaking to me as they're saying the question, I'm forgetting the question. So for that reason, I usually have a pen and paper in front of me and I'm writing down the question. I take a look at it and I listen. I listen to the question and I trust myself. I have an experience for this. I've looked through this job description and I've understood how my experience lines up. So when once I understand the question, it comes natural to me just to answer it. But I definitely have to write it down. And also sometimes I have to ask the interviewer, like, is this what you mean? Um, is this the right way? Do I have this question the right way? So before I even take my time to answer the question, I'm sure about if we're on the same page with what they want.
Yes, I love that. For everyone here, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat the question. We have two ears and one mouth, but sometimes the nerves take over and it leads to us only hearing a part of the question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these other bullets in a moment, but I will just share with you this like sample question that I have at the bottom here. Tell me about a time you collaborated with a team and struggled to produce the necessary deliverables. I've seen this happen so many times, and what I'm about to share. And honestly, I've seen this happen at all levels. So,
Mm,
from an entry level role all the way up to a very senior leader role at an organization. So, they heard you say, the candidate heard me say collaborate. And so they have like already, they're spending the rest of the work time I am putting words into the universe with the question, figuring out how they're going to respond to this collaboration question. And they miss critical components of the question, which are when you struggled to produce a necessary deliverable.
mm,
And so, what can happen is that we can then go down an 8-minute example where the question doesn't get answered. And that can be hard for everyone involved. Um, Structure, I'm going to go back to the bullets, y'all. Like, we're not going to go too deep into this because there are so many resources online. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat that I send to all of my candidates. But structure is your friend when you are interviewing, because nerves can take over. If you have structure to your responses, you are more likely to be concise and to ensure that you cover all of the relevant areas that need to be touched on for the question. So at HubSpot, we really encourage the STAR method. I don't think that there's any one method that is like better or the best. I don't have, I'm not passionate about one method or another. What I am passionate about is ensuring that you have that structure. It also helps you know when to stop. So, STAR, just so folks know, it does stand for situation, task, action, and results. There should have been a comma there. Apologies for my typo. Um, but if you cover those four buckets, you'll know you can pause. And
mm,
one tip that I utilize in my own interview practice is that I will answer a question. I will use the STAR method, and then I'll say, "I'd be happy to provide more context if there's anything else you'd like me to go deeper into." That is really helpful because it's asking for consent. It's asking for it's asking the interviewer whether or not they want to hear more or if they've got it covered.
yeah.
Talking too long is like really painful. So know when to stop.
Oh, I love that. And I also love that there are so many folks sharing their interview tips in the chat. Please keep those coming. This is meant to be a learning exchange for us to all learn from each other. Obviously, Joni's the professional. She does this day in and day out, but we've all been in interviews before and it's nice to like hear each other's experiences. And I also hear some folks saying some of the things that they struggle with. I think I saw someone call out that when they pause during interviews, they often feel like the interview thinks that they're like stumbling or they don't know. And from my perspective, that silent time that you think like maybe 2 seconds of silence is not as dramatic as it might feel inside. That's just my thoughts. Anything to share there, Joni, about like pausing, what you think as like a recruiter?
I don't mind it at all. Honestly, our culture is so quick to like respond to things. I don't know if it's like social media or what it is, but like everyone just like always has an answer, a response, a comment. And so sometimes so I personally think that someone pausing is just really thoughtful. And my assumption is like you are using your brain and you are thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can probably go to the next slide.
Um,
Uh, I love this GIF. I think it's funny.
mhm.
As I was creating this deck, Amon, I just had this moment of being like, I feel like I'm aging myself in so many ways with all of the GIFs I've chosen. So I will, I will get back on track here. But I just want y'all to know that interviewing really is it's a skill. It's not something that people are inherently good at or inherently bad at. It's a skill that can be honed over time, and it's actually really important and helpful if you go into it with a growth mindset. In the last session, Leo was talking about like you could get 1,000 no's, you only need one yes. Um, I will tell you all, like I have at multiple points in my career actively been interviewing, been in the final round for multiple roles and not gotten any of them, right? Like, I've had moments where I've got three amazing organizations, I'm final round, everyone's loving me, and I don't get the job, right? It's hard, but you only need one yes. And I know that the no's feel personal because they sting and they hurt. But the reality is, a lot of times, it doesn't even have anything to do with you. So I just want to share that because I think that it's important to know that, especially if you're getting like auto rejections and things like that. Like, yes, look at your resumes, look at your materials, make sure they're on point, make sure you're applying to appropriate jobs at the right level and all of those things. But also recognize that sometimes there's an internal candidate and they went through that process first and then they rejected all of the external candidates. Or sometimes the job closes unexpectedly because the company decides they're no longer going to hire for that role. Would it be best practice for the company to say, like, hey, we've actually decided not to hire for this role? Yes, it would. But the reality is, 9 times out of 10, you're just going to get the auto rejection and not know the context. But that's not about you and that's not about your materials.
Mm.
So I just share that.
Thank you. I think we all needed to hear that.
um, just practice, y'all. It is the best thing I can recommend, whether it is with a trusted friend or colleague. I don't care if you're talking to your dog or the mirror, like it is helpful. Just because the things that you want to say, you're going to hear yourself and you're going to hear whether it's clear, you're going to hear whether you're fumbling. If you're able to practice with someone that can give you feedback, I strongly recommend that, like, the second they give you that feedback. So if Iman's like, Joni, you're saying a lot, I would immediately go back to that question and re-answer it so that I could practice implementing the feedback she had just given me. It's one of the best ways to hone your interviewing skill.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me. I feel prepared. I feel prepared. What
Okay,
next?
great,
What's
great, great, great.
next?
I think we're going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about transferable experience. And this is going to be an audience participation moment. So, Aman, I will let you take it away.
Okay, perfect. So we've all we're all curious about like how to level up to our next job. We may be curious about how to transition from one industry to another one. So in the chat, please share some of the experiences or examples that you would answer this question. Sorry, let me start over. Let's actually read the question. So, the question that we're all going to think about is, tell me about a time you collaborated with a team and struggled to produce the necessary deliverables. So, that's the question, kind of using the same question from last time. Now, I want you to think about if you were early in your career. What are some of the experiences that you might name to help you answer this question? So, you're early in your career, but you'd like to showcase a time you collaborated with a team and struggled to produce the necessary deliverables. What might be some experiences that you name? So in the chat box, let us know. I'll give you some
And just
time to
so
think
y'all
about
know, Amon and I brainstormed this yesterday, and in the course of like 2.5 minutes, came up with I think 12 examples across all of these categories. So if you've got something on your mind, chat it in for me. Um, what is an example that would meet the needs of this question?
I'll give you one example. So you're early in your career. Okay. Before I get started, it looks like Lynn has this here internship, group project in class, student organization experience. You can possibly talk about a group project or an experience with your group. Yep. First thing that comes to mind is when I worked in construction. Yes, Christopher, like thinking about like the experience that you do have and how that could relate. I'm sure that you had an experience where you collaborated with a team and struggle to produce a necessary deliverable. Think about a time where you missed a deadline. Yes, if you were involved in competition, group projects, first time teaching a class. Yes, so a lot of first times, current experience, using maybe some experience from college, internship. Yes, that's
Okay,
exactly
yes,
what we were
these
thinking
are
about.
great examples.
Mhm.
And one thing that I like to highlight in this moment is that my gut tells me that the reason people were hesitant to maybe share an example, like right off the bat, is because they didn't think their example was strong, like strong enough or good enough, right? This idea of, is it good enough? So I joke that we all don't need to be Sunita Williams. So I don't know if y'all know who Sunita Williams is, but she's, an astronaut and she ran a
Mm.
marathon while in space. Yeah, no, like I haven't done that. I will never do that. But I do have lots of examples that would meet the needs of this question, right? And the
Absolutely.
interviewer and the hiring manager, they don't need they don't need us to be Sunita Williams, right? They just need to know that we are able to collaborate, that we are able to work with a team to overcome challenges, to solve problems creatively, and to achieve the necessary result. We don't have to have the most groundbreaking, incredible example. We just need to demonstrate the skills that they're looking for.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, like maybe we can think of some examples for some experiences you would name if you were changing careers. So let's say you were asked the same question. Tell me about a time you collaborated with a team and struggled to produce the necessary deliverables. And you are in one industry, but you're trying to transition into tech. How could you use your experience from before to make it work? And I
Yeah.
see, Joni, you dropped some examples in the chat.
Yes, I did. Like honestly, career changers, I just really think that career changers have so much to contribute in the tech world.
Mm.
I know Leo shared that he came from the education world. I came from the ed nonprofit world. There is benefit to having people on your team who think and approach challenges in different ways. And that is really, really helpful. So I really encourage you to not always try to connect your answer to like quote unquote something in tech, but rather to just focus on um, aligning your question to the competencies that they're evaluating in that given moment. And in this given moment, they're evaluating collaboration, problem solving, and your achievement orientation.
Yeah, I think we have a few call outs. Just folks saying, is this question actually asking, how did I correct a mistake? And I think in a way it is, right?
Yeah, well, let me just let me go like a little bit bigger picture with this question here, since it's being asked. And I'll also drop in some examples for those that are returning to the workforce, because as a mom, I know that and I know that like particularly with the pandemic, like disproportionately impacting women and leaving the workforce, like it can feel like a really hard thing to return to work. So I'll drop some of those in as well in just a moment. But this question, like, okay, is there a secret behind this question? Right? The answer is no. However, behavioral questions are gems because they are going to tell me many things just from this one question. Let me tell you a few things I don't want to hear, and then I'll tell you a few things I do want to hear. I don't want to hear about a time that you collaborated with a team and it was like sunshine and roses and everything went well and you accomplished your goal. I don't want to hear about a time that you worked with a team and the team was awful and it was a disaster and you missed all your deadlines and nothing worked out. I don't want to hear about a time when you worked with a team and you didn't take any ownership to solve whatever problem was preventing the deliverable from being achieved. Okay? Those are things I don't want to hear. Does that mean that you that you don't maybe have an example like that in your life? Like maybe you're maybe you're early in your career and the example you're thinking of is like a group project and you had like a real jerk on your team, right? Like that could have happened. Maybe not the best example to share during this interview. So you want to choose an example. It doesn't have to be running the marathon in space, but you want to choose an example that highlights that you can collaborate, that you can take ownership, potentially compromise and solve a problem with the different team members and personalities and perspectives that are working together, and that at the end of the day, you're able to achieve the result. Does that answer the question that was asked in the chat?
I feel like it definitely for me, it definitely answered the question, but yes, got some solid yeses in the
Okay.
chat, so
Okay.
super
Awesome.
exciting, and you can also add some examples of some experience you could use for returning to work, and
Oh yeah.
maybe we can get into imposter syndrome, huh?
Yeah, let's do it. And Aman, I kind of just want to give us a pat on the back because we are right on time. Did you notice that?
Yes, I did. I noticed that.
Returners, just so y'all know, parent teacher organizations, like if you have ever tried to put on an event with the PTO, that would work for that question. I promise you.
Yeah,
Local government. I know I serve as an elected official in local government. There's a lot of examples there. There's a lot of committee work that happens. Volunteer organizations, event committees. If you're on an alumni committee for like your sorority or fraternity, if you're doing some sort of special fundraising, those are all great examples.
love that. Love it so
Boosters
much.
for hockey. Yes. Awesome. Okay. So, imposter syndrome. Amon and I are going to both talk about this because it's a thing. It's just a thing. I've seen people in the chat referring to it as we've gone through our session today. But I'm going to be real with you. Like, I suffer from imposter syndrome. And I used to be really hard on myself about that. And I used to almost like it was like this self-perpetuating like cycle that would happen, right? Because it'd be like, I'm not good enough. They're gonna figure it out. They're gonna find me out, right? And then that would just like promote more imposter syndrome and make me feel bad about myself, and that's not helpful. Um, I think everyone has different opinions and perspectives about imposter syndrome. But for me, like, I just don't think it's something that I'm ever going to 100% get over. And I actually think that's okay. What I do require of myself is that I'm able to navigate my imposter syndrome, that I'm able to manage it in moments where I need to show up. And I really also rely on like successful humans who still have imposter syndrome. So like I look at this quote from Maya Angelou and I'm like, okay, Maya Angelou's pretty much a badass and she has imposter syndrome. Like, how is that even possible? The woman's written 11 books. She's just like such a thought leader. I mean, such a respected individual. And if she's got it, like, no wonder I've got it. And you know what? Like, that's okay. Aman, you wanna share how your imposter syndrome maybe showed up when I first met you?
Absolutely. So,
Journey, we should say.
full transparency, when I was offered a job at HubSpot earlier this year, I respectfully declined because I just felt overwhelmed by like all the things in my life. And I was looking at this job in tech as like this really big thing. And I was like, I'm not prepared to enter this and to do this. I'm not prepared to play ball and I don't want to enter here and drop the ball. That was like dropping the ball for me just felt way worse than anything else. And I'm really, really thankful that I had a recruiter like Joni, because most times when you tell a recruiter I respectfully decline, and I have before, they say okay, goodbye. But Joni was like, yeah, can we get on a call? Like, we're going to need to talk through this. I need you to understand why you're turning this down. Do you understand what you're doing? Like, what's the problem? And it was so funny. I told her, I said, I don't think I can do this because right now I'm pouring from an empty cup. And her response to me was, then let us fill up your cup. And I just thought that was just like, wow, like, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's making a mistake, but okay, I did warn her. So I'm going to go on the team and I'm going to see what happens. And it's so funny because I haven't dropped the ball. And I think that what I've learned through this whole experience is that like I have the tools. I have the tools to get done whatever I want to do, even if I don't know how to do it at the time. Someone at HubSpot shared a really, really amazing a piece of feedback, which is like, know where you'd like to go. Like, take a look at the mountaintop. And sometimes on your way to the mountaintop, the path is absolutely clear. And sometimes that path is not clear. There are all different types of roadblocks, but you can't possibly understand how you'd handle that until you get there. And I think through my experience at HubSpot, I've learned that either A, I already have the tools in my toolbox to figure this out. And if I don't have the tools, I'll ask for help and I'll figure it out. And this is what learning is. Learning is not knowing, figuring it out. And if you're going to be successful and grow, this is something we all have to do. So imposter syndrome still shows up for me, but I don't claim myself as the imposter anymore. I am not an imposter. I am actually a diversity, inclusion, and belonging program manager here at Tech. I just have feelings of, fear sometimes, which I've just accepted as normal. So shout out to you, Joni, for forcing me to, to get on the phone with you and talk through my fears, because I really feel like I may not be in this call right now had it not been for that push. So I appreciate that.
I'm just having like the Mean Girls reference where the teacher's like, "I'm a pusher. I'm a pusher." So, um, but yes, I think that it's huge. And honestly, even day to day conversations I have help with imposter syndrome. Aman and I were on a call yesterday prepping for this session because preparation is key, as I mentioned earlier. And we both just had this moment of being like, we're not imposters. Like, we're doing it every day. Like, I've done this every day for the past 22 months. Like, what am I what do I think I'm an imposter about?
Yeah.
So just be kind to yourself and know that this is common. Positive self-talk is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for all the love in the chat, by the way.
Yeah,
Really, really appreciate it.
we do.
Okay. I feel
And
like I'm
now
not
everyone's
imposter.
favorite topic, right?
What'd you say?
And now we move to everyone's favorite topic.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of imposter syndrome, I feel like that might come into play when we're talking about compensation. So we can head to our next slide and we can get into that a little bit more.
Um, so when I was originally asked to do this session, there were some topics that they wanted me to cover, and they said like, speaker preference, like if you're comfortable, compensation, which just like made me feel like I actually have to talk about compensation because clearly it's a thing that that is a little bit tough. So yeah, it can be the elephant in, and like let's just get into it. I'm going to give some high level thoughts here, and then we're going to move into the Q&A. So if people want to go any deeper with this or anything else, we'll have time to do that. But here's where we're at. So sorry, just gonna make sure I'm giving you the right info. Um, there's a trend, a legal trend, in many states. Employers are not prohibited, or I'm sorry, in many states, employers are prohibited. They are not allowed to ask you your current salary
Mm,
or your salary history. It is
mm,
best practice for employers to not ask you this. There may be some that still do. If someone asks you for your current salary or your salary history, this is a moment when you become a strong, empowered first gen and you say, my salary expectations are X, Y, and Z. You can
mm,
give a range, your salary expectation, or you can say, my desired salary is X.
mm,
Okay. You do not need to disclose your current salary. Um, and the reason for this is because it creates equity to not disclose your salary. We know there's articles about it like every day that women and people of color are paid less than their white male counterparts. How that happens is when there's many reasons it happens, like big systemic issues that we're not going to solve on this call today. But
mm,
you do not need to share that. You just need to share your salary expectations. So please do that. If you're like, oh, I'm afraid to say my expectation because it's going to be too high, or what if it's too low and I've sold myself short? Like, what do I do? Um, First of all, it's not on you to feel awkward. Your salary expectation is your salary expectation. If it is a good recruiter or company, they will simply tell you. So I've literally had this conversation so many times. So somebody will say to me, like, my salary expectation is 75 to 85K. And I'll say, okay, that's great. The range for this role, or we're targeting 90K for this role. So I'm going to go ahead and write down 90K. And they'll be like, okay. And I'm like, okay. And we just go from there. It's not an awkward thing. And then if they tell me the 75 to 85K and I'm like, oh gosh, like we only have 70K budgeted for this. Like that's not going to work. It's not on the candidate to feel uncomfortable about being a little bit over. It is on the recruiter, right? Or whoever's representing that company to navigate that. I will say if you're looking into breaking into tech, please know that you really need to look at the overall compensation package. So it's not just salary. Equity is a huge piece. Some of the benefits that we have in tech are incredible. Things like unlimited paid time off, access to mental health resources, I think, and like in ways that a lot of industries don't have. Just there's tons of incredible resources. So like, please know you want to look at the whole picture. Ask for the benefit summary. Ask to look at it, and make sure you understand equity. Ask them to break it down for you. Equity, just for folks who don't know, is stock in the company. Um, Salary is important because we need to pay our bills and our rent and our mortgage. But the reality is, equity and stock are how generational wealth is procured. So that is an important piece, and I want people to understand that. Last, like big overarching thought, let's say you get that offer, like you've done all the things, you've rocked, you get the offer, negotiate. Like, negotiate. You might be told no, and that is okay. That is the worst thing that can happen, is to be told no. Your offer is not going to get rescinded. You're not going to be considered ungrateful or greedy or anything else, any other like negative self-talk that gets into your brain. Ask, maybe they can't up the salary. Maybe they have some other perk that they've held back that they're able to offer you in that moment. So ask, it's important, and don't be shy in advocating for yourself and asking them to break down like a concept that is new to you. It's okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for addressing the elephant in the room. I really
Of
appreciate your
course.
graphic and
Hopefully, we
just
have some questions that people want to hear.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. We do have some questions. And we can actually go to the next slide and get started on our Q&A portion. I feel like this is a really great question. Actually, do you want to address this here before we get into Q&A?
Yeah, I probably should, right?
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
so I just want to say that um, careers are not straight lines, and that's sort of the beautiful thing about them. You will not learn or grow or become successful without taking risk and frankly failing and getting
Mm,
rejected. So please know that you're never going to achieve what you don't try for. Leo said in the last session, like, if you want to be in tech and you go at it and you go for it and you don't give up, like, you're going to get there. I
mm.
believe that it may take a month, it may take 2 years, but it'll happen. So just believe in yourself and know that if you don't go for it, it'll never happen.
Yeah, that's a really, really great way to end things. And I really do appreciate this, Joni, because I remember the moment I decided, like, I think I can make a really big impact on diversity and inclusion work in tech, but I actually didn't have contact at the time. So I would have really appreciated a conversation like this, a space like this to connect with other folks. So I want to thank you so much for leading this conversation.
Thank you for partnering with me. It would not have been the same. I'm
No
excited to hear
problem.
people's questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have some questions and we have about 10 minutes to get through them. Lynn, I'm not really sure. Let us know if we can sit back, hang back to, maybe another 10 minutes or so to ask questions. Joni, if you're free to do that, I'm definitely open. But I saw a really great question in the chat about how to prepare yourself, meaning with like for a virtual on-camera interview. So what should you wear? What should the lighting look like? How should you sit? Should you have something behind you like art, which I think is a question that many people might have in this like virtual interview
Yeah,
environment.
it's a great question. I'm going to first and foremost say that not everybody has an ideal space for interviewing. Um, I am really lucky that during the pandemic, I was able to convert our guest bedroom into my office because I spend many hours a day here, and I was able to make it pretty with art and whatnot. But not everybody has that opportunity. For those of you who don't have like a space where you're like, oh my gosh, like this looks good on camera, um, I would encourage using some of those virtual backgrounds that sort of like either blur out your background and or create a virtual space. I think they look really nice and professional. Lighting can be really important. So definitely see if you can like add a lamp into the room if you don't have good natural light. It's also like getting dark at 4 o'clock right now here on the East Coast. So do whatever you need to do to kind of like help that. Um, I'm not gonna lie, like I mean, I'm a working mom. Like my my background was not this clean and clear. Like this little space right here was not this cleared off. Earlier there was like a pile of junk on it. And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be talking to y'all like let me just scoop up my junk." So, you can do a little tidying, can't hurt.
Yeah. I always opt into a white background and I always wear like literally this almost the same button up or sweater. Like I just wear like a denim button up sweater. If you decide to wear like a really light face of makeup, maybe that, but like I guess a business cash look from the top up, similar to maybe how Joni and I are dressed like right now. I think that makes the most sense.
I've been like obsessed lately with Roxanne Gay, and
Mhm.
I noticed that in a bunch of her interviews, she actually wears the same button up.
Mm.
And she's like super famous. So, but I was like, oh, she's comfortable in that button up. And I really loved that. So definitely wear something that you feel comfortable in.
Absolutely. Every webinar, meeting, big meeting I have, this you're gonna see this navy blue sweater, and maybe I'll rotate between like two other like button ups. So I'm with Roxanne on that one. We also have this question I thought was really good. What are some signs that a behavioral interview has gone well or not well? What are some ways we can evaluate ourselves after an interview? I think this one's great because I think it's normal for you to say like, did we hit it off? Or am I just like imagining that? Or did that go bad? Did I like stumble? Like are there signs where people could know if their interview went well?
Can you ask me the question one more time? I just want to make sure I fully answer it.
Absolutely. What are some signs that a behavioral interview has gone well or not well? What are some ways we can evaluate ourselves after an interview?
I'm going to go kind of meta on this question because there are plenty of people that I have interviewed that I like really vibed with and like I would just like love to be around in life that may or may not be the best fit for a role. So I think it's a bigger sort of how I let me just answer this and how I evaluate my performance on a behavioral interview.
Okay.
I evaluate my performance on a behavioral interview as the interviewee, not the interviewer. Sorry. Just making sure that's clear. When I'm interviewing, did I cover the things that felt important and well aligned to the role that I've applied for?
Mm,
Did I demonstrate the things I value as a leader? So I value efficiency, I value relationships, I value equity, I value integrity. Did my responses highlight the like things that I thought were important to talk about and those values? That's how I define my performance. And if that um vibed with what the interviewer and the company is looking for, then awesome. If it didn't, that's actually awesome too,
yeah,
because that probably wouldn't have been the right fit for me.
that's fair. That's fair. So it's less about the chemistry and it's more about reflecting on if your answers align to your values and to the responsibilities of the role.
Yep. And I've seen a couple people in the chat, and I don't know if anyone else wants to share, but that applied to HubSpot once and didn't get the job, right?
Mhm.
Like it might just not have been the right moment, the right timing. They may have been looking for one other quality that like isn't your strength, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not good at what you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. And another question we had is how people want to know how to connect with us. And I took the liberty of finding your LinkedIn, and here's mine.
Okay, awesome.
Add to the chat. So there's that question settled. All right, let's do some more QAs.
I'm gonna answer Arlie's. I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Are there any resource or strategies that can help you take a mental note of all the possible work experiences or stories? So, one of the things that I've done in the past, and I really think it's a great practice, just go to like top 10 behavioral questions or like, find some common interview questions and then write your responses to those questions. And that will prompt you and push you to think through different examples. And then if you find that after you've answered all those questions with a structure like the STAR method, that there's another example that you would want to share, then think about like what type of question would best suit this example. You almost want to do an inventory of your background and experiences.
Okay.
It's not going to just come to you on the interview when you're potentially nervous. So it's good to think through. That's how I would prepare.
Okay. And we have another question here I thought was really great. Is it okay to ask questions pre negotiation comp and benefits before an offer is made? it would be helpful to understand the company's flexibility before going deep into a process. So it sounds like someone wants to understand, like, should they be asking those questions about comp and benefits before even going deep in the interview process?
Yep. So I mean, I can't imagine that you would go past the first conversation without having some sort of compensation conversation. So, in the first conversation that I have with every candidate, I do discuss compensation, and I work to align the the candidate's expectations around what is budgeted for the role. If those expectations are not aligned and don't match, then I have a really transparent conversation with the candidate about, like, hey, I'm not sure that this one makes sense given X, Y, and Z salary range. So yeah, I do think that that's important. I think it's less about negotiation at that stage and more about just being clear in what your needs are and understanding the company's flexibility there. Again, that's a great place to be asking about their benefits, their holistic benefits package, equity, if you're looking at a tech company, the vesting schedule. Vesting is really the key word with equity because it means that the money has like converted and become yours, and you that now own that stock, and you can sell it or trade it however you see fit. So thinking about the big picture there, but yes, have that conversation.
Okay. Thanks for answering that. And it looks like we have 1 minute left. Lynn shared that we could go for 10 more minutes to answer some questions. Is that good with you, Joni?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm like, oh man, I've gotten them all. Are they going to stump me in the last 10 minutes? Okay.
Okay. No, we're good to go. If other folks are going to move to the next session at 1 o'clock, we completely understand. Otherwise, you could just hang back and we'll answer some more questions.
Yes, if
Um,
you're planning to go the next session, definitely do it. I don't want anyone to miss great content, but happy to answer a couple more.
Absolutely. So we have a question about imposter syndrome here. It says, would imposter syndrome also include not feeling confident in your skills and competency because you worked for a smaller, unknown organization?
Yes. So prior to coming to HubSpot, um, I was working at 100-person organization, and um, I had worked at a larger organization before, but not, it was like half the size of HubSpot. So I
Mm,
definitely had some nerves around that. I think imposter syndrome is really anything you're questioning in terms of your skills and experience, particularly if you have evidence that you are in fact like good and skilled and competent at a thing, right? So it's not imposter syndrome for me to say I can't code or write or create an app. Like I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I
yeah,
actually
I
don't.
literally don't have the skills.
Yeah, like I don't actually have the skills. But if I was to say, "Oh, I don't feel comfortable presenting about interview preparation," like, come on, Joni, like that's literally what you do every day. That would be silly. But that would
Yeah.
just be my imposter syndrome coming out.
Absolutely. For me, I know I definitely had imposter syndrome, again, coming from like that nonprofit education background. And I also think that when you are kind of taking a steep step upward, you can often feel like, how am I, like, will anybody believe in me? That's how I felt, because I understood that with me not having tech experience, but trying to get into tech, it would be somebody taking a chance on me. And I'm like, how do I make myself worth that? So yeah, my imposter syndrome came in there, but I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Like, how can you're going to always question if you can get into a room that you've never been in before? Like, that makes a lot of sense. And
Or
people
even been
coming from,
historically blocked from, right?
yeah, been historically blocked from, and it's like you question, like, is that on purpose? Like,
Mhm.
is yes in some cases, but also no in some cases, and you just have to keep trying.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Let's maybe do one more. I just am nervous that people are going to be late for someone else's session.
Okay, we'll do one more.
Lynn,
Um,
actually, maybe I'll ask Lynn. Lynn, is there a session right at 1 o'clock?
there's one, it's on-demand networking like a boss. I can see it on the side here.
Oh, okay.
So we'll do one
Okay, I
more.
feel better
We'll
about
do
that
this
because
one.
it's like on demand at least, so not like content being presented in the same way.
All right, and I see one more question here.
Great.
Thank you, Joni. Are there any resources, strategies that can help you take mental note of all the possible work experiences, stories, so that you can prepare for an interview? It can be so overwhelming to break down years of life experiences without a strategy. Think you shared this with the star, but maybe you can go into some other methods or deeper
Yeah.
into star if you'd like.
So lots of folks, I've heard this from so many people. So like this is not an original thought, but um, have a brag book slash an inspire folder slash somewhere that you are somewhere that you are documenting your wins so that when you decide it's time to look around or when someone reaches out to you and wants you to explore an opportunity, like you're ready to talk through some of those awesome experiences and learnings. Um, and if you're having trouble identifying, I'm looking at Danielle's question as like a follow up here, advice for identifying specific examples. So I would say, Danielle, like have a critical like moment with yourself and because I've had to do this too, right? Like, do I not have an example because I don't actually I've not done the thing and I like don't have the skill? Or do I not have an example because I am like overthinking it? And or I'm trying to be like, Sunita Williams running the marathon on the spacecraft. Like think through like which of the two is it, and then from there what I've done in the past is literally like phone a friend and be like, so this is the question, but I'm thinking I might go in this direction. And if it's someone who knows your work, they're going to be like, well, what about that time you did X, Y, and Z? And
Mm.
you're like, oh yeah. And I've had that happen too.
I love that. I really love that. Thank you so much, Joni, again for like providing all of this great information, and thanks for allowing me to be part of the conversation. And thanks to all the attendees for all the great conversations and questions. We hope that you can connect with us on LinkedIn, and I hope you enjoy the next session.
Yes, there's so many awesome speakers coming up. V and Jasmine, who are on my team, will be in some networking sessions. So I hope you're able to connect with some of those folks, and I hope you have a great time during the rest of the event today. Thanks so much, Iman.
Yes, no problem. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.